Welcome to the Anomalous Review, the official podcast of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. My name is Michael Glosson. I'm a philosopher of science and technology and the host of the show. This conversation is part of a special series on the Anomalous Review that we're calling the UAP Witness Series. Let me tell you a bit about it. In this series, I interview SCU members who've had their own personal encounters with truly anomalous phenomena. These conversations are a new format for us. As an organization, SCU leans toward a hard science approach to studying UAP. That means using quantitative data that fits into spreadsheets and that can be analyzed with consistent statistical methods. Things like the size, shape, acoustical, and kinetic properties of UAP. That's the kind of data that SCU specializes in. Now that's partly because of our skill set. Most of our members are working scientists and engineers. So we're used to using that kind of data and those sorts of analytical tools. But this approach also serves as a kind of hedge that keeps sober discussions about UAP from falling into unstructured or even unreasonable speculation. You probably know the kind of conversations that I mean. We like structured investigations that employ the tools that we're familiar with. But it would be a mistake to think that we at SCU focus on the hard data points simply because we think that that's all there is to these phenomena. Every one of those data points, after all, comes from an encounter that was deeply and uniquely personal. And these encounters are far richer, stranger, and more complex than the numbers in a spreadsheet might ever suggest. The tools of quantitative analysis just aren't great for analyzing those unique experiential dimensions, though. So, for our analytic work at SCU, we usually just set the rich elements of those stories aside. But shortly after we launched this podcast, SCU leaders told me that there are several SCU members who'd had their own encounters with UAP. And after a few conversations, we decided, let's invite those members to tell their stories, just as they experienced them, along with all the questions and ideas that those encounters gave rise to. Encounters like these are, after all, the source of our hard data points. And inviting people to tell their stories here is a way of showing what's on the other side of the spreadsheets, the unique, complex, deeply strange, and often unsettling experiences that push us to ask questions that data-driven analytical methods aren't always fit to tackle. But let me just say this clearly. Acknowledging the strangeness of these encounters and giving people space to tell them as they live them is in no way a departure from SCU's data-driven scientific mission. But it's meant to complement that mission by acknowledging the very elements of our source material that often compelled us to want to do the scientific work in the first place. This is an expression of the conviction that doing good science means holding on to intellectual humility before a reality that's under no obligations to conform to our expectations or to our tools. And that means facing reality as it comes, even and especially when it challenges our frameworks. We're putting out 2 versions of each interview. There's a full-length conversation and then a short partial edit for those who may not have time to commit to the full conversation just yet. This is a short version. In it, you'll get a quick outline of the guest's experience along with a taste of the deeper discussion that we had in the full conversation. These encounters are full of strange, fascinating detail, and if this version grabs you even a little, we really encourage you to check out the full interview. But since the full versions go really deep, we wanted to make these shorter ones available too. Nick Gold is a media and information technologist based in Baltimore, Maryland. He's worked with major broadcasters, studios, government agencies, and biotech startups. He's been a contributing member of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies and Harvard University's Galileo project, and he's the founder of Declassify UAP, an organization that's helped U.S. voters advocate for government transparency around the UAP subject, and that has so far driven over 25,000 calls and letters to Washington, D.C. You can find out more about that work or voice your own support for UAP transparency at declassifyuap.org. Nick is a stunningly smart thinker. In our conversations, weave together his interests in philosophy, the nature of mind, synchronicity, and the political dimensions of the UAP phenomena. That was a treat for me because those are all subjects that I also want to bring into the general discourse around UAP, so we really get to stretch our legs in these conversations. I hope you enjoy that. Remember, there are two different versions of each of these UAP witness interviews. There's a condensed conversation that just covers some details of the encounter, and there's a full-length deep dive conversation that goes into all of the details and where I ask lots of questions. This is the condensed version. If you like it, look for the full-length version. Here now is my conversation with Nick Gold. Thanks for joining us, and we have Nick Gold here. Nick and I recorded a very thorough version of this conversation a few weeks ago, and SU has decided we want to have both long and short versions of these conversations, these stories of SU members who've had their own encounters with the anomalous, but I don't think it's my place to edit down other people's stories. So what we've decided to do is record a second, shorter sort of Cliff Notes version of the conversation for people who don't have more than an hour to devote to the long version right now, though I think that once you listen to this, you will want to listen to the long version because we go into a lot of the relevant details and interesting questions that inevitably arise whenever you hear somebody talking about an experience that falls so far outside of the range of normal day to day. So, thank you, Nick, for being here, and I just want to let you take it away and tell us about the your history of experiences with the anomalous.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Michael. And it's kind of fun to tell the story. I've told it, many times to different people, friends, family, some SCU members, other people just I've met through kind of UAP world, UFO world. And it's a strange one. I'll tell it as it occurred. I think, for folks who are interested in kind of how I interpreted it a little more fully, listening to that longer version will be useful because there was literally like 42 years of life context that kind of was an important aspect of how I viewed that experience. So we'll save that and, folks can kind of go there. But I will now tell you exactly what happened. It's also kind of easy to tell this story in some ways because I was literally sitting in the exact seat I'm sitting in right now. I live in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm in the city in the northern part of Baltimore, a few minutes walk from Johns Hopkins Homewood campus. It's a little to the west of me. I have a little Baltimore row home, one of the smaller ones. These are the connected houses that kind of fill a block. Mine is just two floors. It's about 13 feet wide and 40 something feet deep. I've got three windows that I'm looking at right now that just look over the Baltimore city sky. Again, not high rises or anything, but I have a parking lot across the street from me. So instead of like buildings right up against me across the street, I have like a really kind of nice view of just kind of the eastern, and then if I look at an angle, the southeastern or northeastern Baltimore sky. And I've been an airplane buff my entire life, or aircraft buff. I see tons of aircraft out here. I have police helicopters, medevac helicopters, and this is as like an everyday occurrence because I have a hospital right a couple blocks from me that helicopters are landing on all the time. Police helicopters are very active both in Baltimore generally and sometimes in my neighborhood. It's a good neighborhood, but still there's some action. And we've had all sorts of aircraft, and this is an important part of the context because, like, seeing aircraft out of these windows is an everyday kind of a thing.
Normal. Yeah.
Like, as an aircraft buff, I'll pay attention if there's a helicopter kind of nearby, especially if it's really close or it's circling or doing whatever. But we've had everything. I see flights coming in and out of BWI Airport. I have all sorts of traffic that, sometimes just goes right over my house. That's not even coming into the Baltimore airport, but it's just like going over the city. And I seem to be on kind of a flight path,
Yeah.
so I can see those jets going, over my house or near. I see weird things. Like we had a pilot project of a spy plane in Baltimore a number
Oh,
of
no
years
way.
ago. It was using like a military sensor on a small aircraft that would just circle for hours and hours and hours over Baltimore, and the sensor could see like a third of the city or whatever. And
It
everyone's a
was one
little.
of those surveillance things. It takes like
Yes, it was a
very high
surveillance
res.
project.
Yeah.
And, they didn't end up continuing it. But, the pilot was to kind of see if they could solve crimes, even if people are dots and, cars are a little grain of rice. if you know where a crime occurred and you know that that was probably the car involved in a carjacking, you can follow it across the city and see exactly where it went and things
Or
like
go
that.
back in time and see where it came
So
from.
that aircraft used to circle over, and you would hear it whining on days where there was like cloud cover and it had to fly a little lower. And then, like, one of the weirder things was years ago, there was a Navy, another sensor project, but this one was looking out over the east coast, I believe. I think it was the J Lens project. And Navy had a couple of giant airships that were moored near Aberdeen Proving Ground. And like one of them, I think you could see out of my window, and it was like for like a year or whatever. And
You're like a
they had,
blimp, right? Like
yeah,
a,
and they had two of these. One of them got away and like went over to like the Maryland Pennsylvania line. Some police force, I think, was shooting it with like shotguns at one point to bring it down. Like, so I've just seen all sorts of weird stuff out of my windows for the now I've been here 18 years. This incident happened 5 years ago, so I would have been here for 13 years at that point, or roughly. And again, it's like air traffic is just so regular and so common. Nothing really tends to distract very much. So that's important context. So let's rewind. It is Sunday, August 2nd, 2020. I'm sitting in this chair. My television is on one wall. The three windows are kind of catty cornered to it. So I was on my laptop. I was pivoted, kind of looking at my TV. I'm part of a meditation and spiritual community in Baltimore called Awake Yoga Meditation. This was, COVID year. So we were still doing our Sunday services on Zoom. That starts at 11. It wrapped up a few minutes after noon. I had my laptop on my lap. And I was like, okay, it's a beautiful summer day. I'm going to go take a walk. It's perfectly clear and sunny out, really nice day. I'm going to go outside. And then what I noticed, maybe just checking the web or whatever, I saw that the SpaceX Crew Dragon was a couple hours from splashing down. Now, it had gone up a couple months earlier. People might remember the two Space Dads, and it was sort of an interesting space flight because it was the first kind of private flight that was going to take actual astronauts up to the ISS. And I had tried to watch that launch, but it got weather delayed, and I never ended up seeing them go up a few days later whenever they ended up launching. So, like, here I am on my laptop. I'm about to go outside, but I'm like, oh, they're a couple hours from coming back. I'm gonna watch the return. I saw that SpaceX and NASA were doing a stream. I was like, I'll take a walk a little later in the afternoon. I really wanted to see them make it back. I really wanted to see them go up, and I missed that. So I was like, okay, this is cool. I'm gonna have this going and surf the web for a couple hours, etc. So I put the stream up, the NASA stream, on my TV. It's on, going on my Apple TV box, 65-inch TV, so it's kind of big, and I kind of have it in the background. And they were still like a little over 2 hours away from coming down from splashdown when I kind of tuned in. So what am I doing? I've got my laptop on my lap, dorking around on the internet, got the stream up on my TV. I've, chatting with my mom and my brother a little bit on messages, like just doing some web surfing. And like 2-ish plus hours goes by, and I'm just kind of doing that the whole time. And here we are. It's like down to the wire. They were coming down into the Gulf of Mexico. It was a water landing or splashdown. We were at the point where they had gone through that period of reentry where they lose radio contact. I guess that's when they start hitting the atmosphere and like turns into a fireball, and like the radio comms are down. So then like they get through that and they're back on radio, and you're like, yeah. And, it's proceeding. They're like chasing away, and again, I'm just watching the stream of this, but they're like chasing away private boats that had congregated, kind of realizing that something interesting was afoot. And they're like, you have to go away. A spaceship is about to splash down here. And, that was going on. And here we are. And I'm like, I've always been interested in space flight as well as aeronautics. And like, I was like kind of on the edge of my seat, a little emotional. And this was kind of, again, a palpable, interesting moment in human space flight because it was kind of shifting to this more private endeavor. And, that was a cool thing to watch. And felt a little historic, like maybe a new era of human just access to space or just, in general. So it's about a minute from splashdown. The module has spouted its parachutes.
Mhm.
They have switched from an aircraft-based zoomed-in camera view to a shipboard camera view, which was a slightly clearer video. And we're seeing this thing, and it's about T minus 1 minute till splashdown or whatever. And here I am, and I'm watching my TV, and I can have these windows looking over the eastern Baltimore sky, kind of in just my peripheral vision when I'm watching my television, because they're at a right angle, right? And like all of my attention for hours has been building up to this moment, this like last minute of watching them splash down successfully and getting out, and then I can take my walk, and it's a beautiful day, and I kind of want to do that, but I'm also really riveted by this event. And like the parachutes are out, they switch the camera view, as I said. They're really like within a minute. And I see something through one of my windows in my peripheral vision in the actual Baltimore sky outside of my house that started to distract me right in like the 1 minute that this has all been building up to.
Within seconds of.
Like, and like as I was saying, that part of the context for talking about all the aircraft I see, it's like things don't tend to distract me, especially if I'm really riveted on what I'm watching on my television. Like an aircraft flying by wouldn't catch my attention. Even a helicopter wouldn't catch my attention. But there was something about whatever I was seeing out of my left eye, kind of in my peripheral vision, that was like kind of demanding my attention, is the way I put it. Like it was something that was like distracting me from even being able to concentrate fully on the last minute of the spacecraft coming down. So I had to make this like split second decision. Am I gonna like distract any of my attention from the TV and like actually figure out why this thing in the sky outside of my house is distracting me? And I was like, okay, I'm gonna look. I'm gonna look. So I kind of like am getting closer to the TV as I walk, the 8 feet to my window here from the side of the room. I'm kind of like trying to pay attention to the TV. It's like the spacecraft is returning and it's saying all the typical things you would expect of a spacecraft coming back to Earth. It's got the announcers and everything. And they're talking about here's the spacecraft and all of that. And I look out of my window, and this thing that I saw was unlike any other thing I have ever seen in the sky before or since. It was a lenticular, shiny, metallic silver ellipsoid. I would say to me, it looked like seeing a disc from the side. Um, Now, it clearly had like kind of, a height to it. So it wasn't like sliver thin. It really looked like an ellipsoid or a lenticular shape from the angle I was seeing it. I don't remember it having it like sharp edges at the ends. It like might have rounded out a little. Again, for people watching the video, maybe this kind of an aspect ratio, like a 3.5 to 1, width from end to end to height. Um, as close as like close aircraft that I see going over my house. So, probably a few thousand feet away when it was at its closest. And it was at its closest when I first saw it. So the TV is saying things about the spaceship. And I look out and I see this thing, and I've been a lifelong UFO enthusiast since I was at least 8 and saw Flight of the Navigator. I mean, if not even younger than that. Yeah, I'm sure I saw ET before that. So, I mean, pretty much a lifer at this.
Yeah.
And I see the shiny silver disc-like thing. No appendages, no wings, no little bubble on top. It was just a perfectly shiny silver metallic object. And, I couldn't fully make out whether it was a discoid being seen from the side because it was so highly reflective. Like you could really just kind of see it as shiny and metallic. It was also making, and it made this light, well, I'll explain it more in a second, but I saw this light associated with it the entire time of the sighting. It might have been part of what distracted me. I can't say that for sure, but it might have been part of why it got my attention when it was in the window. So, from the upper right-hand corner quadrant as I was looking at it, not quite on the edge of the object, like not right on the edge of it, but like down a little bit from there, it was making what I'll call a glimmering glint. So, an irregularly, brightly flashing, but glint like light that like I could almost see like the rays off of. It was like like the it felt like it was flashing at me. And for the first probably 10, 15 seconds, first of all, I'm so discombobulated by the TV kind of providing a semi-appropriate soundtrack. Like, here comes the spaceship. I the glint was distracting. Like it was literally kind of mesmerizing. And it was ongoing. Again, it wasn't on off. It was this irregular glimmering glint. And for the first 10, 15 seconds, I'm like, is that a reflection of the sun or is it making that light?
Hmm.
And like my thinking was sort of caught up on that very particular dynamic. And then I sort of like snapped to it, if you will. And I was like, huh? And I'm distracted by the TV talking about the spacecraft returning. I definitely remember looking away from the window and back a few times to like make sure it was still there. And it was. It was like a consistent object in the sky. I think I even pinched myself at one point, almost like jokingly. And I started to almost go into this like goofy mode, like, ha 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 ha.
Yeah.
Like, I can't believe out of a lifetime of waiting to see something in the sky, I'm in my living room. I'm watching a TV broadcast of a spacecraft returning to Earth. I've been waiting for over 2 hours to watch this thing splash down. And just in the perfect minute before it comes down, I'm having what I can only think of. This must be a UFO sighting. Like I'm even like thinking about it that way. I'm like, this must be what those people who see UFOs are seeing. Like it was this very discombobulating experience and funny and absurd. It felt humorous to me that it was occurring in those circumstances. Like it kind of felt like a little bit of a prank or a cosmic joke.
Yeah.
And I had this thing from the moment I got to the window and kind of it went away. Like it was going to the northeast, perfectly clear day. Again, I could resolve this thing quite well. It just was like hard to tell what it was. No wings or structures that would make it look anything like an airplane or whatever. It really just was like this shiny silver metallic lozenge looking thing making this really weird glinting light. The light was actually the last of it I saw. Again, the sighting was probably, if I had to guess, 40 seconds to a minute-ish tops. And the last I saw of this thing going to the northeast was the glimmering glint, like in the middle of the afternoon, very bright. Like it never stopped making this weird, irregularly flashing light or reflecting the sun, if that's what it was. I can't tell you what the light source actually was. But even as it was going off into the distance, and the last thing I saw of it was like this twinkling star in the sky in the middle of the afternoon, I was like, it's got to be making that light. There's no way it could be reflecting the sun so much the whole time I'm seeing this. I've never seen a glint off of an aircraft happen that way.
Mhm.
Like you see them briefly, like for a moment,
Yeah,
and
for it to
then
be so sustained.
this was totally sustained despite its irregularity, but again, ongoingly kind of glinting, flashing, and to the point where like it looked like a twinkling star before it disappeared into the distance. I was like, it had to have been making that flash. So it went away. I immediately, and I have records of this stuff. I texted my mom like a minute later because we had been chatting even a few minutes earlier. In fact, I went back to the message chat. UFOs had even been a topic of conversation, and yes, that is something I talk to my mom about semi-regularly. But like we had even been hitting it on the UFO topic not too many minutes before, and I'm like, I really think I just saw a UFO out of my window. In fact, if you give me 2 seconds, I can tell you what the exact words I used were because I have a little folder of my data associated with the sighting. If I can find it here. Um, I thought I had it. Oh, there it is. August 2020 UAP sighting. So here is the text with mom. And I have timestamps on it too. So the splashdown, according to records, was 2:48.
Hmm.
And I said something to her at 2:46. I said, so cool to watch it coming down at 2:46. And then my mom said, because she was watching the stream too, once I told her about it from her house in Massachusetts, I was like, she said, Space Dads, love it. Now we have to wait an hour before they emerge. And she's referring to them coming out of the capsule.
Mm-hmm.
And then at 2:51, I responded to her and I said, I just saw something very weird fly by outside just as they landed. It was very strange. And then my next message, also at 2:51, it looked like a UFO. And then like emoji I added. And then she responded with the emoji with the star eyes. And I said, it looked very shiny and metallic. She says, I wish I saw it. And then I said, it was almost flashing. So that was kind of in the moment, my like within a minute of this occurring. Did I go and walk the 8 feet to pick up my smartphone and take pictures of this? No. I was totally mesmerized by the experience, especially after like kind of waiting a lifetime and looking up for
Yeah.
a lifetime. And then said, and it's funny because I had this calculus. I think it briefly flashed through my head, no, flash. Um, I think I thought, should I go grab my phone? And I think there was like, I can't miss this. There's always a chance it's just not there if I turn away for a few seconds, and I have to take this in. It was a very strong feeling I had. I need to pay attention with all of my senses, and I need to really take this in. And if I was trying to look at a screen, and I hate people at concerts who are like staring at the
Same. Yeah.
screen, and
I'm
so
very
like I'm very wired to not be that guy anyway. And I'm like, this is probably the most interesting thing I've ever seen in my life. I don't want to be looking at a screen. I want to take it in. So I think I probably did make the calculus very quickly to like just put my focus on the experience and not taking photos of it or trying to rummage for my camera. And I in retrospect I wondered, maybe that's why we don't see more photos and videos of these things, especially the like close thing that's like looks like a UFO a few thousand feet away. Because it's like, yeah, that's something you have not seen before, and it is very distracting, and it does not seem kind of like right or normal. Like there's something very
You're
odd.
still trying
I
to process it. You haven't understood.
Absolutely. I don't remember any sounds either. And normally I would hear the sounds of an aircraft, and I have no recall of any sound associated with this thing. And granted, the TV was on, but I don't it like I would hear a helicopter very loudly at that distance. I would hear an airplane at that distance. I don't remember any sound with this thing. So maybe that even subconsciously was like part of the weirdness of seeing something in the sky that's clearly a physical object. So I'll give a little more context. And I'm going to say this. I don't always add this element, but for fullness sake, I suppose. When it was the last few moments and it's heading out and it's only a little sparkle at this point, I had this like really the sense like I should try to like send it a thought.
Mhm.
I don't know why I had that feeling or that urge, but I was like, what do I do in this last few moments of seeing a freaking, thing I can only describe as an unidentified flying object or, unidentified anomalous phenomena in the sky out of my window very clearly, in this weird synchronistic moment of the spacecraft returning that I was, watching on the TV stream. And I was like, I'll just send it a mental message. I see you. I see you. And then it went away, and then I texted my mom. I walked back to my seat. I sat down. I sent the texts that I read you. So you had left quite an impression after a lifetime of being fixated on the UFO subject, especially with the like, what do they call it? Not just the synchronicity, but the high strangeness factor that a lot of people talk about in their UFO sightings. Not universal, but a lot of the time there's these. I felt the urge to get up and look out the window, or something synchronistic was occurring. So I had that element, at least from my subjective experience, from my perspective. It was a highly synchronistic moment. And considering
Absolutely.
synchronicity is 100% about your subjective experience, I can say there was synchronicity involved. And so I was obviously thinking about this for the days afterwards. I think one thought that came into my head, I don't know, it was probably about a week later. I think I was taking a walk. Maybe it was even just days later. But I remember reading at one point that like one of many phrases that ancient cultures have used for like the cosmic beings is the shining ones.
Yeah.
And that was funny because shiny was sort of the main word that stood out to me about this thing. Not only was the skin of it shiny in this metallic way, but then it was like
Shiny.
shining this light. Like it was as shiny can be. Like it was shiny. And I was like, the shining ones, eh? You know? So that was just a thought that went through my head. Then a few days after that, I think it was, I had this other thought. And I was actually stimulated to think this by having watched the movie UFO. This was a dramatic movie, came out, I don't know, it's probably 7, 8, 9 years old now. Has Gillian Anderson. It's totally a good UFO movie, like a fictional movie, loosely based on the Chicago O'Hare discoid sighting from
2000.
early 2000s. It was like 2002, 3, 4, something
I
like
think it was six. Yeah.
yeah.
2006.
So they made a dramatic movie that was very loosely inspired by those events. But one of the plot lines in the movie was that they got recordings of air traffic between a pilot and like the air traffic tower. And that was just like kind of a plot in the movie, having gotten that audio from the internet. And I was like, I wonder if air traffic logs are on the internet. It's 2020. Maybe that's a thing these days because I was, I wanted to also approach this as a ufologist, right? Like I have to do the basics. I have to kind of do the research, break it down. And I think I had previously, years earlier, had heard about ADSB,
Mhm.
but like kind of had forgotten it and did a couple Google searches and was like, oh, that whole system came online and is absolutely a thing. So I went to Flight Radar 24, which I found within moments. I knew the exact couple minute window of my sighting because of its contemporaneousness with the splashdown and even the
In
text
your text.
messages that I
Mhm.
had. So I know the 2 minute window. I mean, it was, 246 to let's even call it 250 or whatever. Somewhere in that range. Splashdown was 248. I think it was really about 247 to 248 ish. I was seeing this thing. So you can go and you can go to an exact moment in time and you have to you convert daylight savings, Eastern daylight savings to UTC, which all of these sites use. I must have done the conversion like 20 times to make sure I had it right.
Mhm.
And there was nothing. There was like a very, very distant plane going the other direction that at a distance that would have been a speck in the sky because I know what those look like. And in the years since I used Flight Radar 24 and ADSB, what is it, ADSB Exchange. So I've like looked at hundreds, if not thousands, probably of aircraft, even out my windows, but just out and about in general on those apps in the years since. And it allows me to kind of safely say, I think at the closest part of the sighting, it was probably 2,500 to 3,500 feet from my eyeballs, because that is about how clearly I can resolve other smaller aircraft. And I have now this basis of comparison of normal aircraft, none of which looked like this thing or in any way behaved like it or the glint or any of it. So it was interesting to see sort of confirmed in the ADSB data. And I've since gone back to ADSB Exchange as well because it's a little bit of a fuller data set. They don't filter out as much of the military traffic. I have noticed that sometimes Flight Radar 24 filters out military flights and stuff. So even on ADSB Exchange, there's just nothing in the region that this was in any way, shape, or form. Nothing. In fact, it was like almost weirdly empty airspace,
Mm.
for miles. And so I was like, okay, doesn't seem like it was an airplane that for some reason looked like a UFO for a minute. So I got that piece of data. And again, it was just really nice that I knew the exact couple of minutes of this thing. And I, went a few minutes on either side and there was nothing. And then some months, if not even a year or two later, I looked up, I wanted to know what the wind speed was and the direction, because balloons, maybe it's a balloon or whatever. And I did find that in hourly increments for Baltimore. And while the wind was going, this object was going northeasterly, the wind was going northeasterly, but this object had to have been like well over 100 miles an hour. Like at the distance it traversed the sky, it was, helicopter speed or small plane speed. So it was like much faster than I think the like 7-ish miles an hour that the wind was. So it wasn't some kind of dirigible being powered by the wind or whatever, right? Or moved by the wind. Um, Here's another funny aspect of the story. I have like a decent camera setup, including a nice tele zoom lens, Nikon. And after this experience of seeing this thing, I decided to set up a tripod. I have a gimbal head, a lens, a zoom, a nice Nikon camera, and I was like ready for the next one. I was like, there's, and, eventually I ended up taking it down because I think I literally overheard someone walking by, like talking about the camera up in my window, and I was
Oh
like,
yeah, they
oh,
could
this
see
is
it from the ground. Yeah, it's
this is way like someone actually even asked me at one point if I was a narc or something. I was like, okay, I can't have the fancy
no,
camera out my window anymore. But I did have it for like probably a month hanging out there. And it's funny, several weeks after this sighting, I actually saw a Mylar balloon go by in roughly the same kind of general flight path. And it looked totally different. It was much smaller. It was bouncing a bit in the wind. It wasn't like this smooth, clearly under its own power kind of thing. It was, again, much smaller. The thing that I saw on August 2nd was clearly like small airplane size.
Mhm.
I even ended up going to a little calculator app on some web page where, if you know the angular size of something, the distance to it,
It'll give you some
you can
range.
calculate the diameter or whatever. And I played with all of the parameters, and I kind of created handles on all of them. Like I think it looked like an object of about this size, and I think it was about this distance, and I think I could kind of remember about what the angular size was, but I played with a few different calculations, and every possible permutation of the math I did kind of came to the typical, I'll call it, uh, 10 to like 30-meter diameter from tip to tip of this thing.
Mhm.
So it was like, UFO size for most of these things, like, 30, 40, 50 feet tip to tip. Um, and
Maybe 10
probably,
feet tall or something.
yeah, and like probably a few thousand feet away. And again, that's kind of since been confirmed by watching just hundreds and hundreds of aircraft and looking at the app and kind of, remembering what it looked like. And I'm glad I took it in so viscerally because it's pretty easy to remember. And I will say this too. I can't vouch for the photos, the guy, his entire history of posting many weird UFO photos and videos. But there's a guy in Mexico who goes by Juanito One,
Mhm.
and he captures all sorts of stuff, or he claims to. And there's one set of images. I think he took 3 images of this purported object that he saw near where he lives in Mexico that looked just like what I remember my object looking like. It's just this perfectly shiny silver ellipsoid, kind of looks like a disc from the side, but it's a little vague because it's so shiny. His pictures were on a much more overcast day, and it looks a little darker than I remember the thing that I saw because it was a very bright, light day, but it looked like very similar, like a shiny, metallic, ellipsoid looking thing that has no discernible features.
What's funny to me about you saying that is that the people who say, well, 181 could be hoaxing these photographs by, taking hubcaps and throwing them up in the sky. It's so interesting that you know for a fact that yours was not a hubcap in the sky because its behavior couldn't have possibly be accounted for in that way. So it would be really unusual if somebody could produce the same sort of very strange observational, results from a hoax. That's
And it's funny, there are some toys. In fact, I even got a few in the wake of this because I wanted to have objects that in some way resemble this. And give me 2 seconds. I'll go grab the two that I found. The first thing I found, I think I was looking, Googling or on Amazon, I was looking for like shiny metallic ellipsoid. And the first thing I found is this very interesting toy, which is literally a shiny metallic ellipsoid. I don't think the dimensions are quite right. The one I saw was not quite this ratio. In fact, this is the golden mean. And this is actually a top. It's a very interesting toy I found when I looked up shiny metallic ellipsoid. And this is a toy where if you spin it at a quick enough rate of turn of spin, it will actually stand up on its end and then enter a very controlled spin on its tip. And I'll see if I can still do it. That wasn't a good one. Well, I can usually still do it. I'm not doing it really well. So
Quick look.
anyway, then there's these other things that a lot of people probably be familiar with. They come in pairs and they're magnets.
Neodymium magnets, yeah.
And you can kind of like they make this funny sound when you throw them up and it, zings together. So like this also kind of looks like it, but I'd say maybe this is almost a little too elongated. So if you think of something that's a little closer to the brighter one in color, maybe a little longer like the magnet, but this is sort of the family of object and what it looked like. And it's like, someone could fake that or whatever, but here's what I can say. As you just said, I know that sometimes people see aircraft size objects that look like those shiny metallic ellipsoid toys, tops, magnets, or whatever for real. They're not hubcaps, they're not toys thrown in the air. They might have other strange effects like strange light effects like the glinting, glimmering thing that I saw. They sometimes are seen at moments of high synchronicity, like when I saw the one I saw. So, I can't again, I can't vouch for Juanito Juan, but I can tell you that that thing looks just like what I saw. So if people go and find his photo and it just looks like a very shiny metallic ellipsoid and it's like three and you see like a shack across the street that it's above, that's just more or less what the one I saw looked like. So, I analyzed it, I looked at it. I haven't seen anything like that since. But that was my sighting, and it made me, I was pretty sure that UFOs were real. I'd been researching this since I was a kid, but like it was funny to have that palpable experience of seeing one and then being able to kind of research my own sighting as a ufologist. And frankly, it only becoming more mysterious through that process. So, that was my sighting story. I don't know what to say. I still kind of get a little giddy and weird thinking about it. And I'll just end with this. If I'll answer any questions you might have, but like I look out of these windows every day. This happened in my living room. Like
Yeah,
I'm on
you're
the
not
second.
in unfamiliar observational conditions, like you were in your home.
Well, and not just that though. It's like I wanted to see one of these my whole life, and I didn't even have to leave the
Mhm.
seat I sit in most of the time. And like I didn't even have to change my gaze. Like it came into my peripheral vision as I was watching TV. Like I didn't have to go anywhere to see a UFO, even though like you would think I'm going to see this taking a hike in the woods. I'll see something weird someday or wherever. No. Like my UFO sighting was sitting at home in the chair I sit in most of the time, and it like entered my peripheral vision.
Like came to you. That's so. As I've been doing these interviews, I don't want to drag the conversation too long because I do want people to listen to the longer version, which goes into much more detail about all the questions you might have. Um, but as I've been doing these interviews, I've gotten to sort of compare and contrast people's experiences, and yours is in so many ways like totally contrasting to a guy named Mike Pritchard's, who I've also interviewed, who's an SCU member, because you both saw these sort of shiny objects that are just seem like purely geometric and don't have any features on them. But while you were absorbed in the experience and felt like you wanted to kind of stay with it and didn't feel like you wanted to knock yourself out of that mode and take a picture of it or whatever, his was exactly opposite. He immediately had this sense of urgency that, like, I can't be here. I have something important to do. And he had absolutely nothing important to do. And it like drove him away from the experience. And those, it's like there are these, we get frustrated when people say, well, I saw it, but I didn't take a picture of it. But we have to recognize that there's like a sort of depth of mode of experience that you're in when you encounter something that's so far out of the range of like normal content of experience that you have. It's not just like a visually strange thing. It's strange in all sorts of ways, and your mind is like trying to integrate it. And then it seems like there are effects that these things can have on you, whether it's directional, whether it's intentional or not. But the effects can be so deep and strange and lasting that it's really striking to me.
Yeah, it was a very surreal experience to see something that, again, in a backdrop that you're very familiar with,
Mhm.
especially when it has some meaning to you, and then it's there and it's just kind of silently doing its thing and making a weird light, and again, the synchronicity. When people say these are more like religious experiences or some surreal thing or like a dream, like it very much is more like those things than a typical day-to-day experience. You're not in a normal mindset because it catches you so off guard, especially if you're not expecting it. Who's expecting
Yeah,
this?
who is? Yeah.
So, I understand why there aren't more pictures, even just through that component alone, of people being very wrapped up in the experience and not responding in a way that they normally would, staring or again wondering, like, where am I? What's going on right now? So, those are very real, and reasonable, I think, responses to having a totally surreal experience. And a person couldn't be more wired to expect, to have a UFO and then be like, oh, here's a UFO. And like, I am that guy. And um, yet I was completely caught up in it and just in awe, just like anyone else would be who sees something really strange. And, I did put in MUFON cases and a New Fork case. There are no others from that day. And that's a whole other set of questions, obviously. And people are like, oh, do you think anyone else saw it? And it's like, how am I supposed to know? First of all, no one other than weird UFO geeks knows that there's things like MUFON or New Fork.
Hmm.
This is Baltimore, where there's like police helicopters overhead all the time, and most people are not looking up at air traffic. It was for a Sunday afternoon, it was pretty quiet. There weren't a ton of people out, even though it was a nice day. And obviously, I'm not in a position to say whether anyone else saw this thing. But there were no other reports that I'm aware of. So
Hmm.
it
And
is what it is.
you're pretty sure it was a physical object?
Yeah, yeah. It was just entirely consistent with how I would see physical objects in the sky, how I do see physical objects. Again, I think that's part of the reason why I did the little like reality check tests a few times of looking away from the window and back. And, it moved in a very consistent way. It wasn't zigging or zagging or doing any erratic movement. There's a small chance that it was closer to a hover when it was in the position where I was distracted by it initially. I can't say that for sure, but I just feel like, I can't say for sure whether it had the same velocity the entire
Mhm.
time I saw it. It could have changed the rate of travel.
I
But
didn't mean to ask if it was physical in order to doubt your experience, but I
oh,
meant more
yeah.
in the sense of like, um, it did it just seem like the surface was so perfect that it had no features in the way that maybe would be
Yeah,
strange.
I mean, I think that's what made it so strange was it's other than being shiny metallic and making that glinting flashing light. Um like it clearly did not look like, I mean, I've seen blimps at close distances many times. Like in fact, I'm kind of a blimp geek in addition to UFO and aircraft geek. I've even flown a helicopter. I used to take helicopter lessons for a little while and happened to be at an airfield where there was the Goodyear blimp once. And I'm like really within proximity of the giant, Goodyear blimp flying around in a little Robinson R-22 helicopter. So I've been around airships and blimps and dirigibles, and like this didn't look like any of those in any way, shape, or form. But just because it's perfect and it had a very metallic sense to it. And whatever this light was, whether it was generating it, whether it was a glint, whether it's a plasma effect, I can't comment on any of that. I just know what it looked like to me. Um, it was very real and palpable and physical in the sense that light is a property of physics. So I have every reason to feel there was a physical object of some sort in the sky. Um, it looked like the kind of thing that if it was landed in the parking lot across the street, you could walk up to and knock on. There was nothing dreamy about the object. There was nothing translucent. I mean, it looked like a very clear, like shiny, like those old World War II bombers, and some of them had the shiny metallic,
Polished
steel
sort of.
surface.
Yeah.
Like it looked like that, but without seams or anything. It looked very perfect, but like it looked like metal on the side. It didn't look like plasma, although I don't know what that would look like as an aircraft because that's not a human thing we do. But um, it definitely looked like a palpable physical thing going through the sky, but not making any noise and, doing its UFO thing.
Fascinating. Thank you so much for telling this story. But I encourage everybody to listen to the much longer version of our conversation where we get to ask very detailed questions about what it might have been and the sort of context of ideas in which you interpret your experience, which I think is the part that I want to focus on in this series, or at least in the longer version of these interviews, because the hard and fast, like MUFON and NUFORC reports, pare down experiences to a few data points, and that's not the character of these experiences. They're very strange and very rich and personal, and laden with ideas and significance. And so, thanks for being open and willing to explore those questions with us.
Well, it's a pleasure. And again, I want to be really clear. Like, I can't tell anyone listening to this what that thing was. Some people get very vehement about it was this or that, or whether they're talking about their own experiences or someone else's experience. Oh, that was definitely the Pleiadians and blah, blah. It's like, I have no interest in taking a stand. I saw what I saw. It was very abnormal. It didn't look like any human constructed object I've ever seen. I can't think of any reason why on a sunny Sunday afternoon flying over the middle of Baltimore City, you'd have some top secret experimental aircraft. And again, I can't tell you that this was the case, but subjectively, and that's what these experiences seem to be about, emphasizing the subjective first person experience of those who have them. It kind of felt like it was for me. I'm not saying it was, but from my point of view, how could I not have that experience? Being a lifelong UFO enthusiast and watching the spacecraft return on TV and then this thing out the window, and it felt staged. And maybe there's something about the subjective experience itself we need to delve into with these things. And I know it's tempting to want to have more objective scientific data, and I think that would be great. And I think it's like, I probably could have taken a picture of this thing. Although I wonder if the glinting might have messed with autofocus. Who knows? But, the subjectivity of these experiences seems like almost is being emphasized by the nature of the experiences.
The point, yeah.
The lack of objective data. There is objective data about UFOs, but the fact that it's not overwhelming at this point, it's almost like, but we do have overwhelming subjective experiences around these things. And maybe there's something to that. Maybe we're being guided to that. I don't know. But thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my strange experience.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here, Nick. The Anomalous Review is a project of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. It's hosted and produced by me, Michael Glosson, and edited by Kelly Michelle. Our theme song was written and performed by Thelma Crisanti. Communication and PR work is by Preston Dykes. Our advisory team includes Jennifer Roach, Robert Powell, Richard Hoffman, Joshua Pearson, and Larry Hancock. To find out more about SCU, check out explorescu.org.